All right, so don't forget, the exams on Monday. Make sure that you've gone through and looked at the old exams, and as I mentioned in the review session, and obviously I sent out everybody a link to the Zoom video of that, but make sure that you walk in there with your answers already in your head. Right? Because again, the final, you're going to have plenty of time on the final, but on the midterms, you're obviously constrained for time, as you found in the first midterm. So make sure that you've thought through the answers and also know what are 3 characteristics of the law that would minimize coercion that Hayek talks about, et cetera. All right? Okay, so last time we were talking about we finished this idea of progress and the idea that progress required property rights, and it required the idea that the individual is the unit of account in some sense, and that you have to believe you can make a difference, right? You don't think the only people that can actually do something are heroes like Hercules. And then we started talking about the feudal period and what some observations of the feudal period. Why is it that it went so long if you go from 900 AD to 1450 AD, not much is happening, right? Unless you are a history professor here, you probably can't look at Monty Python's Holy Grail and know exactly when that is, right? Is that 1263 or is that 1245 or whatever? Whereas if you watch a Seinfeld episode and they have, they have a phone that is it's just sort of wireless to the phone that's on the wall, that's not today, right? It's pre-cell phone days. So, what we're trying to do is look through, okay, what are these, as I said before, what are the general characteristics of the feudal period that lead to this lack of economic growth, and what happened over this period that would change the way that we organized ourselves and changed people's attitudes and led to the beginnings of economic growth. And last time we talked about it's primarily an agricultural society, that the political and economic authority were combined in the same institution, and that the terms of exchange were set by custom and law rather than voluntary exchange. So you had a just price versus a market clearing price. And we said that on the manor, the way it worked was that the lord was the person that was both the political and economic authority, and that we had servile labor. That is, you didn't get paid for what you did. If you were a serf, you didn't get paid for what you did. But you couldn't get kicked off. They couldn't throw you off the manor, okay? But you couldn't move to another manor. And we noted that generally the way it worked was that the serfs had an area on the manor that was farmed in common, and they could keep the product from that, and then the rest went to the lord. And last week we said that you had how might you escape that? You might join the military, right? You might become a squire, and then later become a knight, and maybe become a knight of the round table at some point, right? Or you could join the church, right? You could eventually you could become a priest, and then you wouldn't be a serf. But those are basically the 2 main ways that you could get out of this servile labor situation. And then we said that you could live in the towns, but we said that the towns, what was going on in the towns is that you had the guilds controlled the towns. Right? We noted that there were a lot fewer people in the towns. We said that it was primarily people were living on the manors, but you did have small towns, and we said that these were controlled by the guilds, and we said what were guilds? They were basically crafts union in a sense, if we were to talk about it in today's terms. And they determined whether you could become an apprentice, or if your parents, if your father was a craftsman, then you could become a craftsman. But they had the social and or the political and economic power were concentrated with the guilds in the towns. And we noted that an example of that was when Dorothy lands, when she gets the land of Oz, she lands in Munchkin Land, right? And we noted that the Lollipop Guild greets her in Munchkin Land. But if you think about it, if you were in the Lollipop Guild, this is the kind of lollipop. They would say, this is the kind of lollipop that you make, and this is how much sugar you put into it, and here's who can make lollipops, etc. So again, there's no incentive to innovate. You know, the guilds are going to say, here's how lollipops are made, and so there's no incentive for you to say, well, wow, what if we made a smaller lollipop, or we made more lollipops but we made them smaller, or something like that. There was an incentive for you to innovate in that idea. Now, the manor was a self-sufficient entity, right? Basically, not completely, but essentially self-sufficient. That is, most of what you ate, most of what, you know, your living quarters, everything there was done in the manor. There wasn't a lot of trade, right? There was some limited trade with the towns. But the manors were self-sufficient. Now, if you really think about that, that's not going to be a very wealthy state of the world. If the only food that you could eat had to come from Hillsdale, right? If the only clothes that you could use had to come from Hillsdale, if the only building materials that you had to have would come from Hillsdale, then you can imagine how wealthy you would be, right? You know, if your 5G network depended on, it had to be developed in Hillsdale, right? If you had to launch the satellite, had to be launched from Hillsdale, that, you know, the world would look a lot different. So if you sort of think about, if somebody, you know, do you really want to be self-sufficient? And the answer is, if you're going to be self-sufficient, then you're probably not going to be very wealthy. If we just think about countries, well, just as an example, a couple of years ago, some friends of ours won a hunting safari in South Africa, and it was a week-long hunting safari, and so they won it and asked us if we want to go ahead. You know, my wife and I wanted to go ahead, so we went. But as part of that, you had some time off, and we went to what was called a village, which was entirely self-sufficient. They made their own, housing. They grew their own food. They had their own, roosters and everything. They weren't entirely self-sufficient because the person that was showing us around was wearing some sort of T-shirt that clearly got from, some donation from some place. It had, I forget what the, Georgetown University or something on there. But guess what? They were really poor, right? In fact, it was interesting. We were in a hut that they had, made from materials that was there, and it looked like it was a cement floor, shiny and hard. And I queried them about it, and he said, "Oh no, that's cow dung." They had a mechanism to make it so that the cow dung would dry and be shiny and hard and whatever. I don't know how they did that, but the bottom line is, a self-sufficient place is going to be poor, and that's how the feudal system was generally. That is, the manors were pretty much a self-sufficient industry, and it was mainly barter, right? There wasn't money agriculture at the time, right? Exchange was barter. Again, think about if the only way you could buy something was you had to trade something that you had for what they have. Okay? That's not going to work very well. How are you going to trade for a cell phone, right? You got to find somebody that's got a cell phone that wants what you've got, right? And then you come to some sort of barter. Well, there's not going to be a lot of exchange doing that. Yeah.
I'm just curious. So, how does this sort of discussion of self-sufficiency with regards to like resources tie into like American desire to be self-sufficient with regards to energy and stuff like that? Is that a good thing?
Yeah, the question is, do Americans want to be self-sufficient with regard to energy? And the answer is no. When we start talking about the next period when trade starts to develop, the mercantilist period, we're going to talk about what's called comparative advantage. And basically what Adam Smith talked about was that the French could grow their own wool and they could have their own wine, and the Scottish could grow their own wool and have their own wine, but we'd be better off if the French made the wine and the Scots made the woolen clothing. And so it might, if you had some sort of defense thing, sort of defense issue where you said, okay, we think we're going to be at war with this country over here, and so we don't want them to be the ones that are supplying some vital resource that we've got here. Okay, well that's a defense issue. That's not a self-sufficient. It's not that you want to be self-sufficient. It's that you don't want to rely on an enemy. If you're at war, you don't want to rely on the enemy to produce something that, let's say. Let's say we were at war with Germany, which we were at one time, and let's say Germany produced all our steel. Well, then Germany might not send us any steel to build the planes and everything that we needed to drop bombs on them, and so that might be an argument. But in terms of pure economics, you don't want to be self-sufficient. And again, we'll come back to that, but just sort of thinking about that, the trade, if you're allowed to trade, then there's lots of things that have become available to you. You don't really want to be self-sufficient, which is what was going on in the feudal period. Basically, the manors were pretty much self-sufficient. There was some barter, there was some limited trade that was going on, but guess what? They were poor for hundreds of years. Again, I think you were going to bring up the point about the defense. Is that you might have a defense issue, but that's outside of, do we want to increase the amount of economic activity? Do we want to increase progress? Okay. All right. So there were few specialized traders. There were some, but there were not very many. It wasn't like there were people that specialized in trade. I buy some things and then I turn around and I sell it to you. Okay? There was a little bit of that, but not much. And so you had this system where there wasn't very much trade going on. What trade happened was basically barter exchange, and there were some few people that came around with pots and pans clinking off the side of the cart or whatever. There's a YouTube video where there's this interview with what's his name? Casey. What's the comedian? Casey or something like that. Louis C.K. Yeah, Louis C.K. And he's talking about it's called Everything is Amazing and Nobody Cares or something like that. It's a little video that you might want to take a look at. But he's talking about, and there might have been a few specialized traders that came to the town or from the town and came to the manor, but it wasn't like there was a lot of retail trade going on. And so this is the whole system was bound by custom, right? Custom and tradition. So what does that mean? It's going to be very stagnant, right? This is going to be a stagnant economy when you have that. So what happens is that eventually this system couldn't respond to changes very well, right? And we're going to talk about this, what happens in the middle part of the 14th century when you get plagues and droughts and that kind of stuff. That is, this system can't respond to changes very well. And so when you get, again, the whole system eventually breaks down. And so notice that when you go to, I don't know if you've ever been to Europe, or if you go to England or whatever, it's not a feudal system there, right? It's gone. There's not, they don't have serfs, they don't have castles, they don't have any of that stuff, okay? That all disappeared. Right? And it wasn't like somebody woke up one day and just said, oh, hey, maybe we ought to have money agriculture. Right? What happened was there's this gradual change over time is what happened. And this system of feudalism lasted for a long period of time, but then when there was a major event happening, it wasn't able to respond, and so that thing breaks down. When you have money agriculture begins to be developed, and individual property holdings, then you get economic growth. Money agriculture and individual property holdings that's when you get economic growth begins. Again, we go for long periods of time. 900 AD looks a lot like 950 AD, looks a lot like 1100 AD. Things aren't changing very much. But eventually what happens, we'll talk about it in a moment, is money agriculture replaces this, what we talked about, this open field collective, which was right? That is this. What did it do? It replaced what we were just talking about, open field and open field collective agriculture. Right? That is, you didn't have your own little piece of property. And of course, when you go to England today or you go to France today, what do you have? It's property owners, right? Or if if in the United States, what do? There, you drive by and there's, like this cornfield is owned by an individual. You don't have a manor where the Lord owns, 12,000 acres, and you have a bunch of people that are serfs that are tied to the soil, and they, the only benefit that they get is they get to collect a part of the corn that's grown on their piece of the land that the Lord says they can collect the product from there. That's not how it works. Okay, so that system's gone. But you could again see why that system wouldn't work very well. And so then what happens is once you get this money agriculture and private property holdings, then what happens is you get improvements. Basically, you get innovation in agriculture. You get improvements in the way that you, in these agricultural techniques that improve the amount of agricultural product that you get from any particular piece of property. Now, if we look at the towns couldn't be as self-sufficient as the manor. The towns couldn't be as self-sufficient as the manor because you got people that are living together, obviously. And so the towns depended more on trade than the manors did. Right. So they depended more on trade. And of course, what does that mean? It means that they're going to be the ones that where the growth starts to happen, right? That's where this transition from a feudal system to what we're going to call a mercantilist system, this period of trade, when we talk about 1450 to 1750, this transition happens in the towns. That's where this really starts to begin. Because in the towns, you're going to have economic relations, right? What do you need? You need property rights, right? You have contracts, right? Contract law, right? So you get economic relations where I'm going to trade you for something, because we can't be self-sufficient in the town. We can't grow all our own food, right? We got to get our food from somewhere. And so what happens is we have more trade, but what does trade require? Right? Property rights. I got to know that you own that thing that you are selling me. And any kind of exchange, again, in law and economics class, we talk about this in some detail, but any kind of economic exchange, what do you have? You have to have an assumption of property rights in order for that exchange to happen. And so, again, you have contracts and contract law and things like that. Where is that developing? It's developing in the towns. And so that was really basically the foundation where market capitalism eventually comes about. It's not coming from the manor. It's coming from the towns. Now, again, the guilds were monopolists, right? If you sort of think about it in those terms. The guilds were the monopolists in the towns, and they determined what's to be produced. They were basically the central planner, right? As I mentioned before, they determined how many lollipops are going to be made, how are you going to make the lollipops, who can make lollipops. Yeah.
So were the guilds the central planners for the entire town, or just the industry of which they controlled?
Well, the guild masters controlled the town as a whole, essentially. So you might have the lollipop guild, and you might have the whatever kind of guild, maybe the clothing guild or something like that, right? So the individual guild masters they controlled who could make clothing, right, or who could make lollipops or that sort of thing. And so the guilds as a whole, the guild masters as a whole, controlled the town. There wasn't necessarily one guild that controlled the whole town, but as a whole, the people who were running the show were the guild the people that ran the guilds. So basically, again, what we talked about profit was one of the roles of profit you talked about in the midterm was an incentive to innovate. And we said that Burzel and Roseberg said that innovation was the key to economic growth, and we've talked about that, lots of times. Why are you so wealthy? Because all this innovation that's happened. But you can see that this system, right, just like on the manor, there was little incentive to innovate. Again, there was some, the towns had more, were making more steps into market capitalism than the manors did, but still there's little incentive to innovate because they, or little ability to innovate, because essentially each guild master was a central planner for, or whoever controlled the guilds was a central planner for for that particular town. Now, where does this thing all start to move from feudalism? It's, you know, the towns is a little bit of, you can see that's a little bit going on here, and that we've got more trading than we do in the manors, and there's a, there can't be self-sufficiency. So the towns lay the basis for property rights but still it's not a system that allows for a lot of innovation. But there's sort of like a parallel universe that's going on here. And the parallel universe is the trading cities. So about the same time, there was these trading cities that were outside this whole feudal system where you've got the manor and you've got the town nearby, and the things that the manor can't be self-sufficient with, they can go to the towns, and there's a few specialized traders, but it's mostly barter that's going on. What happens is that you have trading cities that begin to develop in sort of the central part of what we would think of the central part of Europe, and they will, from Italy through Germany, what is not, you know, that wasn't Italy and Germany now, or excuse me, then, but what, if you looked at that map today, early Germany and what we call the Low Countries, right? That is, they're low in terms of elevation. That is, if you were looking at Holland and the Netherlands, if you were looking up that way. So these trading cities began to develop during this period. And this was the first area that was outside the market system, or excuse me, the feudal system, and allocate resources through the markets, right? So they began to allocate resources through market exchange. So again, it's sort of like a parallel universe that's going on. That is and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But an aspect of the feudal period was that the idea of the future as being something different from the present was not what people were thinking about in the feudal period, right? Brazell and Rosenberg talk about this. They say that the idea of the future as being different from the present just didn't exist. If this were 1150 AD and you're living in this feudal system, you're not going to think, oh my gosh, in 50 years things are going to be really different, right? You just don't even think that. Just like we were talking about belief in the individual and is the individual important. If you don't think that, then you're not going to behave in a way to say, oh yeah, maybe I should go out and change things. You don't think, oh my gosh, maybe we should make a better, mousetrap. You don't even think about that. We don't think that if this is, again, 1110 AD, we're not thinking, oh my gosh, things are going to look very different when we get to 1150. Right? You guys have not lived in the feudal system, so your idea of the future being the same as the past, that's not happening, right? You think the future is going to be very different than what it is right now. If you're thinking, oh, geez, we're just going to have 5G network 30 years from now? Probably not, right? You're going to expect that you're going to have some sort of thing you can implant behind your ear and it'll project a three-dimensional hologram will come out and, that's how you'll entertain yourself or something in the future, right? What's with this Netflix thing, right? No, but if this were the feudal system, your attitude would be very different. And so it was biased against change. Which is why it didn't change, right? This whole feudal system was biased against change. And so that's one of the reasons then that this whole system stayed pretty much the same. One of the things they thought was that could keep things secure, right? If you could keep things the same, right? Does this create a secure environment? Well, it turns out that it doesn't, right? That is the inability to respond to outside forces led to the elimination of the feudal system, or the gradual movement away from the feudal system. So it could not respond to these outside forces. And we're going to talk about plagues and drought. Around page 55, I'm presuming your version of how the Weskerich is probably the same as mine, but if you look at around page 55, they talk about something that Hayek talks about in his chapter on responsibility, right? So think about what Hayek said about responsibility. Right? Hayek says that you have to believe that you're responsible for your actions, that is, your station in life is due to your own action, and you have to believe that that's the proper way to do it, right? You might be bummed that you're living in abject poverty because the value of your marginal product was low, but you have to believe that the system itself is worth keeping, right? Otherwise, you'd have revolution. And so it's interesting. Here's a quote from Berzel and Rosenberg. They say, the medieval viewpoint shielded people from the painful psychological consequence that attend a belief that personal disasters may very well be attributed to one's own miscalculation. Right? So I'll read that again. The medieval viewpoint shielded people from the painful psychological consequences that attend a belief that personal disasters may be very well attributed to one's own miscalculation. What are they saying? They're saying, at least you didn't feel bad that you're a serf because of your own actions, right? You weren't a serf because of your own actions. You were a serf because your parents were serfs, okay? It didn't have anything to do with you, so you're not going to feel bad about the fact that you're a serf. What would Hayek say? Hayek would say that if it were in a market-based economy, you might feel bad that you are in abject poverty, right? And why are you in abject poverty? Because the value of your marginal product is low. How can you move yourself from poverty? What does Mises say? You got to increase the marginal products of people. You have to give them skills and education or capital to use. So again, this is, I just want to point out, is that about page 55, basically that the authors talk about responsibility in a way that's consistent with Hayek, right? They talk about responsibility. I mean, they frame it in a slightly different way than Hayek, but that's really what they're talking about. So basically, it was people didn't recognize the need for individual responsibility. Again, you can't have a market system if people don't believe in that, right? What does Hayek say? A fear of responsibility is a fear of freedom, right? And so basically what's going on here is that the people didn't recognize in the feudal system, people didn't recognize this need for responsibility. Remember, Hayek says there's two reasons that you want people to be responsible for their actions, right? They'll behave in a more efficient fashion. They'll make a better use of their knowledge, and they'll have incentives to be innovative. And if you're not responsible for your actions, somebody else is going to coerce you, right? What's going on in the feudal period? In the feudal period, you don't even think about it, but because custom and tradition has the Lord is going to tell you what to do. You don't think, oh my gosh, why is this Lord telling me what to do? Okay, that's the way the system works, right? And why should you think that you're going to make better use of your knowledge? Because the Lord's going to tell you what to do anyway, right? So why are you even thinking about, oh yeah, I think it'd be better if we grew this kind of corn rather than that kind of corn, right? You don't even think about that because the way you've been living for hundreds of years has been that the Lord's going to tell you how to do it. So the two things that you're going to talk about on the midterm about why you want people to be responsible for their actions, there's no reason for that in the feudal system because the Lord is coercing you. The Lord is telling you what to do, so there's no need for you to even think about how you might do things better. And the towns received charters from the Lord, and what they would attempt to do is sometimes how did you get to be a town, right? You had to be chartered by the Lord. The towns were chartered by the Lord, or they could attempt to ally themselves with the king. And have the king be the one that charters. And if you were the guild masters, whether you chose to try to get a charter from the Lord or charter from the king really had to do with how much power you had to tax your people that lived in the town and how much power you had to regulate. Okay? So you may choose the guild masters would choose whichever gave them more power, all right? Right? They want to be able to tax and to regulate so that it wasn't like they were trying to seek freedom from the lords. It was that they were trying to make it so that they were the ones that were able to tax and regulate. Now, if you look at innovation, right? If you look at the pace of technology during this period, it was pretty slow. Right? Okay, very slow. It wasn't like you didn't invent anything, okay? How about the clock, right? If you had some history, the clock was invented during this period, and that's a pretty big deal, right? To have a clock. You all got clocks on your phones now. I have a clock on my wrist. There's a few people still have clocks on their wrist. The clock is we're going to say there were important innovations like the clock, but what did that rely on? That relied on beauty's father, right? It relied on random innovation. Right? People who were tinkerers or, and we've talked about this. We've talked about this several times, right? I mean, we're talking about how does, why do we want to have profit, right? We want to have profit to serve that innovation, and that's when we first brought up Beauty's father and Beauty and the Beast, and how he had just wanted to invent this wood chopping machine just for the sake of inventing it and taking it to town, etc. Okay, but what do you get? You get random innovation, right? Do you have tinkerers that are doing it? But you didn't have a system for systematic innovation, right? There's no systematic innovation. You have rapid innovation today in your world, and it's systematic, right? Because now if I am Apple and I think of a new iPhone 27, okay, guess what? I may earn all sorts of profit if you guys are willing to pay the opportunity cost, the resources to make the iPhone 27, okay? And so we get systematic innovation. Now you got the iPhone 12, right? Nobody's using like the original iPhone, right? Nobody's using it, well, few people using flip phones, but not too many people using flip phones. Why is that? Because you've got the systematic innovation, and you guys expect it now because you've been living in a system very different than what this feudal system looked like. So then the last point we'll make here is that a key to the political system of the West was a diffusion of power among the lords. Okay, this is important, that a key to the political system in the West, because this book is about how the West grew rich, right? The key to the political system was that there was a diffusion. It turns out that learning to spell with phonics is much better than whole language. California experimented with that. But a problem with phonics is that whenever there's like two of something, whether it's got two F's and one S or two S's and one F, phonics ain't going to help you, right? So, so diffusion has two F's, right? Diffusion of power among the lords. That is, you had a separation of power. I, as the Lord, had power over my manor, okay? But there was another Lord over here that had power over the manor over here. And a key to why did you get this political system of the West change, right? Why did we make it that we went from this manorial system to eventually to market capitalism? One of the major reasons that happened was that there was a diffusion of power among the lords. That is, the king only had power if it was the king only had power basically granted by the lords. That is, they wanted they had to have the Lord support them. Let's just put it this way. Right? They had to have power of the lords. Basically, the lords consider themselves independent authorities. The lords considered themselves independent authorities. And basically, you had this idea of limited power, right? I mean, that's one of the things that Hayek's talking about, right? What was the purpose of the Constitution? To limit the temperate majority. But here we're limiting the power of the king. Like, there wasn't a constitution out there doing that, but the idea was out there, right? This idea of a limited power of the king was out there in the West. So the idea of there was an idea of there was a limited power of the king. So how many have ever seen the movie Braveheart? Is that all? Are you kidding? Okay, all right. So, all right, we should watch the movie Braveheart, right? Mel Gibson's in it, and Mel Gibson plays William Wallace, and then there's another guy that plays Robert the Bruce, and it's basically about what happens is he's having this revolution, and Mel Gibson's he's riding around with a horse, and he's fighting everybody and being Mr. Cool Guy. But Robert the Bruce, his father tells him, don't worry about Mel Gibson, right? Don't worry about him. Why? Because he doesn't have the power from the Lord. He's not going to become king, right? The reason he's not going to become king, you got to get the Lord's behind you. So don't go out there and start, riding your horse around, bare-chested. Just get behind there and start talking to the Lords, right? So that's what happens in the movie. And of course, what happens, anybody know what happens to Mel Gibson in the end? You don't know? He gets executed in the end, right? And Robert the Bruce becomes the king, okay? So again, another movie that sort of demonstrates what's going on here. The idea was, the important, I think, point here is that this idea that there was not absolute power of the king, that the king's power could be limited by the Lord's, what does that eventually lead to, right? That eventually leads to an attitude that has a government with no arbitrary power, that you have, and eventually you get to Hayekian, Constitution of Liberty, where you bind the temporary majority of the democracy, but basically you're binding the authority by a written document saying, hey, we have these general principles that there is no arbitrary power, right? The power of whoever's in charge, whether it's the king or the president or whatever, is going to be limited. So that idea is sitting out there in the West, and their argument is that's how we eventually became rich. We transitioned from we had this basic understanding that is necessary for market capitalism to eventually develop. All right, so for Monday, you have the exam. Again, don't fail to have looked at the old exams. I sent you the Zoom link to the review session. You can, or to the video of the Zoom for the review session. But you're not going to be surprised by the questions. Don't walk in there and be trying to remember, oh yeah, what are the 3 characteristics of law that Hayek says minimize coercion? Okay, have it in your brain when you walk in there.